Welcome to another edition of the Exponential Podcast. I'm Todd Wilson, Director of Exponential. We're thrilled you're taking advantage of this free resource that was recorded at the Exponential Conference. It's part of a library of hundreds of hours of free training. In our mission to equip church planning leaders, we seek to distribute as many free resources as possible. Visit exponential.org to learn more and to check out the programming for the upcoming Exponential Conference.
Okay, everyone. Delighted to have everyone in the room this afternoon, and I want to make sure we maximize our time here. I'm supposed to walk around with this. I might let it down every now and then. They're recording, so I kind of have to hold on to this. But just by way of introduction, my name's Tim Catchim. I work with V3. Church planting movement. Some of you got a card I handed to you. I've got a buddy of mine who's supposed to be bringing some other cards. Like, that's our plug. This is our space to plug that. So the v3movement.org is the website. And on that card, there's like a little QR code that you can scan with your phone. And there's actually a free chapter from this book, a PDF that you can download about the difference between Pauline and Petrine apostles. The chapter in this book about that is on that download, so if you guys want to access that. But okay, plug is over. I'm Tim. I live in Clarksville, Tennessee right now. I'm 38. Okay, so don't let my baby face fool you. I do have facial hair envy. For those of you who have facial hair, I wish I could grow some, but I can't. So I've always wanted to have a goatee, but I've never been able to grow one. So I'm jealous of you. The guy in the front, he's got a cool goatee. Okay. Are you really? Okay. Yeah, that makes it worse, man. Thanks for saying that. He's 38 and he has a goatee, but I don't. Okay, so we're talking about the fivefold and teamwork. And I'm going to assume a little bit of ground on the front end here. Instead of going with in-depth definitions and all of this kind of thing, I'm going to assume a little bit of ground. But part of understanding how the fivefold works in teams is managing the perception that we have about one another. Okay? And so me understanding if you're an evangelist, I can now start to interpret what you're doing on this leadership team and how you're functioning, not only the value that you bring to the team, but I can now start to interpret how you're interacting with me when we're having conflict. Okay? I can now start to interpret, why is it that you keep coming back to this one thing over and over again? I thought we resolved that. Like, why does this keep emerging in our leadership team? Okay? It also gives me a lens to kind of say, is this something that we're putting too much weight on because the person leading the team, their particular gifting is this, and they're actually putting too much weight on this, and we actually need to shift things and put weight on something else. All of this goes to how I perceive you. Okay? And so we are going to get a little bit into definitions because I think if you give really good definitions with these things, it brings clarity about how I can start to interpret you, the kind of expectations I bring into the table when you're on the team. Okay? So if someone has a physical Bible or a tablet, electronic Bible, let's read Ephesians 4, starting with verse 11 through 16. It's hot in here, isn't it? Are y'all sweating? And that thing's cranking out, isn't it? Wow. All right, we're going for old school here, man. I'm going to start sweating. Somebody give me a rag. And all right. So let's read verse 11 through 16. Anybody got it? Ephesians 4, 11 through 16. Go ahead.
He gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, rather be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes, rather speaking the truth in love. We are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint, with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow, so that it builds itself up in love.
Okay. I don't know about you guys, but when I started engaging the Ephesians 4 text, I'm just thinking, there is so much in here. I'm actually disoriented while I'm reading this. He's covering so much ground. He's mentioning so many things. There's so many moving parts. Let's start off with some simple definitions of these giftings, okay? The word apostle is actually two words in the original language. It's apo and stello, okay? The word apo means to separate, and the word stello means to send. Now, think about the implications of this for teams, okay? If you're an apostle and you're leading a team, you are wired to, at some point, at some time, separate from the team. Okay? What's the opposite of separate? Joining together. Okay? Apostles, when they lead teams, they typically have a problem with moving too fast and separating themselves from the group and not dealing with things that emerge within the group that relate to healthy, functioning teams. Okay? They also have a challenge that they don't like staying in one place or with one team too long. In other words, they're kind of wired to get something started and then separate from the group and then go get something else started. Is this making sense? Okay? Yeah, I mean, exponential is a magnet for these people, right? So they're also very much about sending, about moving. They don't like staying. Okay? If you have an apostle leading a team, they're always going to be saying, we need to keep moving. We need to keep moving forward. Where are we going? Where is this ship going? Let's take it where it needs to go. Okay? This is their default wiring. If you think you're going to change them, you're not. Okay? But the logic of Ephesians is that this person is never supposed to function in isolation from these other giftings. And so these other giftings help temper and help mature this particular gifting, this person who's wired to separate, sometimes too quickly, from the group. They're wired to create distance between themselves from the group. Apostles on teams, apostles will come in on a team and they'll do inventory and they'll take, hey, what's everyone doing? How is things going for you? Oh, that's great. How are things going for you? Not so good? You need to get that worked out. And then they go out of the team and they don't actually invest time and energy in the team to help them get through the challenges they're facing. Why? Because they're going and trying to get to the destination, and they leave people behind. And guess what? When things don't go the way they're supposed to go, the tendency for an apostle is to look back at the group and say, what's wrong with y'all? They demonize the group. They think the group is unspiritual. How come y'all can't keep up? Come on. We got places to be. We got places we're going here. This is how they're wired, right? You can never pull your apostle card out and say, well, I'm just an apostle and that's why I do what I do. Red flag. Red flag. You need some equipping and some training by these other giftings so that your gifting actually helps to build up and mature the group instead of doing harm and creating dysfunction within the group. Is this making sense? I'm belaboring on this because I'm thinking there's a lot of apostles in the room. Okay? I've learned this the hard way. When I was doing campus ministry, we had I was spending all of my time on campus, but I wasn't paying any attention to the actual campus ministry I was leading. I had a girl come up to me and say, I just don't feel like we actually know each other here. I really don't feel like we're a community. Which gifting do you think she was probably operating out of? Be the shepherd, right? So I'm thinking, well, what do you think we ought to do? So she's like, for example, did you know that we have 2 people who have birthdays this week? And I thought to myself, why would I know that? Why would I know that? That's what I thought to myself, right? So I say, no, I didn't know that. And she's like, well, I think we ought to do some birthday parties. Well, guess what I said? That'd be great. Why don't you do that? Why did I say that? Because that means I would actually have to spend time in the group and actually go through the process of worrying about how the party's going to be done and all that. I'd rather be out there with them, okay? And this was the cynical, judgmental side of me. I thought to myself, how many birthday parties have we thrown for people out there? I don't see us throwing any birthday parties for people in your dorm. How come we're only concerned about people in our group? This is what I was thinking, right? I didn't say it because I had a little bit of smarts about me. But I didn't say it, but this is how I was thinking. Guess what? She was facilitating some equipping in my life, and I was immature in my capacity to function as a shepherd. I was immature. Now, the story gets worse. I told her I would do it, and I forgot. And she and those 2 girls who had birthdays, they invited a bunch of people because we said we were going to do it on Wednesday night. She wanted to do it during the Wednesday night Bible class, and I said, no, we got to do it afterwards. Right? We should have done it during the Wednesday night Bible class. Invited all of her friends and had a great birthday party. I forgot to do it, and we had all these people show up. I felt about that big. Okay? These are some of the pitfalls that come when someone operates in isolation from accountability and equipping by the other giftings. Okay? What I didn't know at the time is that if you invest significant amount of time in the group and people do feel a sense of community, they do feel like people actually love each other here, we do know what's going on with each other, it makes a great group to invite people into. Does it not? Yeah. Yeah, man. Some of y'all apostles say, like, oh, he's hit me right there. That's me. Okay, so you got the apostle. The shorthand definition of an apostle is someone who is sent and extends. If you leave them alone, they're going to worry about mission, extending the organization, or they're going to actually leave the organization and go do mission. Okay, if you leave them alone, that's what they'll do. They'll gravitate towards that. Prophets is a combination of pro and phates. Okay? The word pro means before. It can have a spatial implication, like me, I'm standing before you. But it has a temporal or a time implication, which means they're the first in a sequence of things. Okay? The word phates means to speak, but the literal definition of phates means to bring something into the light. Okay? In this room, where are the shadows? Are they at the center of the room? Where are the shadows at? The shadows are in the corners, are they not? If something was brung into the light, where was it before it came into the light? It was in the shadows, in the darkness. Okay? Prophets have a tendency to hang out in the shadows. Not at the center, but at the edge. Now, this is really important to understand because where is power and influence typically? At the center or at the edge? At the center. Okay? Prophets have an internal warning light that goes off when the center makes claims about certain things. Like, for example, we love everyone. And yet there's people who have been marginalized and pushed to the edge that don't feel like they're welcome at the center. The prophet has a light that goes off within them that says, I don't think we're speaking truth here. In fact, I've been hanging out over here, and I'm intimately familiar with the people on the edge, and I know that they don't feel welcome at the center. Now, me as an apostle, I understand this dynamic, but I don't lay awake at night and it bothers me like it does a prophet. Okay? There's a gap between the center and the edge, and it bothers the prophet that there's a gap. Okay? This is bringing something into the light. The pro means they're often the first ones to bring it into the light. Okay? Now, if you get into like a prophet whose their dominant gifting is a prophet, but their secondary gifting is a shepherd, they'll deal with issues related to the soul. Things that may be hidden within your psyche, within your soul, within your emotional world, that have been pushed to the edge and that are in the shadows and you don't know about them, and yet they're operating within your life and they're creating dysfunction and you haven't named it and you haven't dealt with it. And a prophet shepherd will help you bring that into the light so we can now deal with it and find healing and find restoration. Okay? This is really important on teams because a prophet on the team is going to help us pay attention to things that we ordinarily wouldn't pay attention to. Okay? Being at the center there's a tendency to have self-deception and blindness when you're at the center. Prophets are often like the canary in the coal mine. You guys know what that is? Coal miners, when they go way down into the ground and they start mining, it releases gases that are underneath the earth, but you can't smell them. And so what they would do is they would bring a canary down into the coal mine, and the canary's lungs are more sensitive to the air than the human beings. It's really horrible for the canary. Okay? They would wait until the canary keeled over. They were the first to give an indication that something needs to be paid attention to here. And it was at their own cost that they bring attention to that thing. Okay? Prophets on a team, if they're mature, they will know how to mediate those insights on your team in ways that don't push you away and alienate you and polarize you. This is what an immature prophet will do. Okay? An immature prophet will stand over here and they'll throw stones. And they'll be cynical and they'll be negative. Do not baptize your negativity or someone else's negativity and say, well, they're a prophet, that's just what they do. No. No. That is not the dominant function of a prophet. If you think about Jeremiah had 4 deconstructive things to do: tear down, uproot. He had 2 other things. I always forget them. He had 4 deconstructive, but he had 2 constructive: to build and to plant. If someone's, I always know I have an immature prophet on my hands if I never hear anything constructive to bring to the table. If they're always living in that gap area, they get overwhelmed by that sense of deficit on the team or on the things you're trying to do, and they function as a really toxic presence on the team. You can never do anything right. It can never be good enough. Now, question, has anyone ever had anyone like that on the team? Yeah. There's a reason why there was a school of the prophets. in the Old Testament, because being a prophet is a volatile experience for the prophet. It's hard to negotiate an energy when you're always walking around, you always have this big gap. We should be here, but we're over here. Living in that space, it's difficult. Okay? In the British Parliament, they have something called the loyal opposition. Basically a bunch of like retired old fat guys who are bankrolled by the Parliament. Notice how they phrase it. They're first loyal, but then they bring them in every now and then to kind of give them feedback about what's going on in Parliament. Okay? I can hear anything you have to say if I know you're loyal to me. If I think you're not loyal to the team, if I think you're not loyal to our vision, I can't hear you. See, prophets need to hear this because they think, oh, I'm in with God, and whatever I perceive, I can just tell people. No, you can't. You have to package that stuff well. They need to be equipped by the evangelist. They need to package their insights in ways that can come across as good news as much as possible. Sometimes the gap is too big and too wide for it to be any good news on the front end. Right? But more often than not, the prophet doesn't know how to package what they have to deliver, and they end up doing damage to the team and damage to the relationship, which means from here on out, it doesn't matter what you have to say, I'm not listening to you. And then the prophet takes it personally, they own that, and they say, well, I guess I'm not welcome there, I guess I'll just hang out over here. And they do what the Essenes did back in the first century. They left the people, they went to the desert, and they said, we're just going to wait on God to judge you. Guess what? Now you are part of the problem. Once you leave the community, you're part of the problem. Because guess what? They need you at that community. Is this making sense? Yeah. Okay. The evangelist is the one who brings good news. This the prophet one. That's a cue. The prophet questions and reforms. The evangelist tells. This is the proclamation piece, okay? If everything is evangelism, nothing is evangelism. Okay? Faith comes by what? Hearing the word. That means somebody's talking. Right? It tells and invites. The great thing about an evangelist is that they're fantastic storytellers. Okay? But here's a question. Who gets to write history? The winners do, don't they? Did you know writing history is an editing process? It's called selective memory. There's things that don't make it into history when the people who won the war get to write the history books. This is the nature of storytelling. Okay? You can't tell a story. You can't include every single fact when you tell a story, right? When an evangelist tells a story, they often selectively bring things and sew them together, and they create like this mirage. Okay? The reason why it's so important is because they're bringing good news. They don't want to bring bad news. They want to bring good news. What this does is if I'm on this side, I see the story and I think to myself, I've always wondered if this existed, and you're telling me it does. This looks really, really good. So what I end up doing is I end up crossing the line. I step through that mirage, and then I get on this side and I'm like, hold on now. I thought you said that if I were to come over here, like I'd have this, but I'm not seeing this here. So if evangelists aren't careful, they create bait and switch. They tell you everything you want to hear to get you to cross the line. And then once you cross the line, guess what? Not only did you not tell me about this, but now I don't know where you are, because you're the climax of a relationship in an evangelist ministry is to get you to cross the line. Once you cross the line, they've left and gone out to find somebody else. And now I feel like I'm your project. Right? This is how an evangelist thinks, okay? Evangelists typically, they typically want to bring things into the team without scrutinizing them and vetting them before they implement them on the team. Why? Because they see goodness in everything. So an evangelist will be out here and they'll find some idea or some book or some, thing that they've just encountered and they think it's the greatest thing in the world, and they come back to the group and they're like, man, we got to do this. Well, as a team member, I'm thinking, you do realize we've been working for several months on doing this over here. And now you're asking me to switch gears and basically reinvent what we're doing right now? Just because you're all excited about this one thing? Evangelists will often bring people onto the team because they see potential in them, but that potential has not been developed. So they'll invite people on a team who do not need to be on the team because they don't have the character or the competence to be on the team. But because they see so much goodness and potential in them, you find people on the team who should not be there. Why? Who invited you to be on the team? This guy did. Is this making sense?
Yes.
See, but here's the deal. Without an evangelist, it's going to be hard to get people to join what you're doing. Right? I want an evangelist on my team. They're fantastic recruiters. They're fantastic networkers. They will create loads of social capital for you on your team. Okay? But doing team means I'm aware of what I bring to the table. It also means I'm aware of what I don't bring to the table. And sometimes the things I bring need to be tempered by what other people bring to the table. Is this making sense? Okay, so you've got the shepherd, which is poimen. The shepherd protects and invites. Protects and provides. Now, question. This protects and provides comes from the two things a shepherd carries in his hand, or her hand, a rod and a staff. Okay? If you think a shepherd is always the cuddly, nurture, let's get off and, make it all better, that's the provision, that's the provider. Okay? That's the staff. There are some shepherds who carry a rod. And if they perceive anyone is going to bring harm to this group, they go into battle mode. Shepherds in that vocation back in Paul's day, they not only had to fight off, animals, they also had to fight off other shepherds who would come to steal the sheep and sell them in the marketplace. We're talking about some real conflict here, some real confrontation that takes place when the shepherd feels like the group is being jeopardized. Okay? I've got a buddy in Clarksville who's he's a shepherd. We had a men's gathering, and he's walking. I saw him doing this, and he's the protector. I saw him doing this. He's just walking around. We had this big pavilion with fire. He's just walking around looking at everybody. He's being sleek. He's not like making eye. He's not doing that. He's just quietly walking around. We had some guys who came with guns that night because we had meat carnivore night, and everybody's bringing their guns and showing what they hunt with. He's going around checking out. Does anyone have a gun that they're not showing? What's he doing? He's protecting the group. He's inspecting the sheep. Do we have any wolves among us? He does this naturally. Nobody's telling him to do this. This is how he functions in a group. He's eyeballing everybody. Why? Because he's concerned about the group. Now, when does a shepherd move the sheep? When there's danger, there's the protection, and when the food runs out. So question, if everyone's being fed and everything is safe, will the shepherd ever move the sheep? They will not. this is how this can come to play when you have an apostle and a prophet and an evangelist leading a community, which a lot of you will be a magnet for attracting these kinds of people on the front end of your church plant. You'll be attracting a lot of pioneers, people looking to change things. I've noticed some things about the church that aren't right. You're giving me this great vision about this church. It's going to be great. It's going to be better than all the other churches around here. I'd love to be a part of that. And they bring this idealized notion of what church should be into your plant, right? You like what I typically tell planters is on the front end you'll attract wounded pioneers and wandering settlers as you plant on the front end. In other words, there's people who've been in existing churches who've tried to pioneer, they've tried to innovate, they've tried to do mission, and for whatever reason, it could have been their fault, could have been the church's fault, they got booted out. They're wounded. Okay? Or there's people who are looking for that really deep sense of connection and longing that they haven't found in their small group or they haven't found in their local church. And here's a small startup group who has an idealized version of what we could be. And that wandering settler thinks they're going to find a deep sense of community. In fact, they think that group is only going to be about providing that deep sense of community for them at this phase in their spiritual development. Okay? Wounded pioneers and wandering settlers. This thing with movement, this thing with mission, as an apostle or a prophet or an evangelist, if you're trying to pioneer, you want to check in with your shepherds in your community and say, where do you think our group is? Why? Because they're probably going to be the ones most in touch with the group, with the needs of the group. Now, you remember we started off talking about this person leading too quickly and then no one wants to come as fast and then they turn around and demonize the group and say you're not spiritual because you can't hang with my vision? The apostle often needs to be equipped by the shepherd to be able to move the sheep in a sustainable way where all the sheep can actually come along for the journey. Who's going to be the person you want to invite to help you do that? Your shepherd. These are really valuable people when it comes to teams and church planting. They're going to let you know the pulse of where people are in the group. And if you move too quickly without getting their feedback and getting intel from them, you may do damage to the group. You may erode your credibility as a leader because you're so frustrated with them that they can't come with you. And all along you've had somebody available to you to say, did you know so-and-so is maybe thinking about going through a divorce? And you're up there clamoring about we're going to save the city. And they're saying, I'm trying to save my marriage. Did you know that maybe you should probably have tempered and been aware of that as you answered their questions after you casted vision on Sunday to get everybody to come with you on this great and fabulous journey? Wouldn't that have been helpful to know? Yeah. That's just an example, right? Like I'm sort of contriving that in my head as I'm talking. My hunch is that if you are a pioneer, it takes a lot of time and effort to do the work of relating to a shepherd and walking with them and building camaraderie on your team. Otherwise, you'll always see them as an obstacle to you getting to where you want to go. Now, I have run into situations where a shepherd repetitively, I'll just make up the time frame. It was, 5-6 months or something. I just don't think we're ready for this. And on the front end, they told us why. So we go about dealing with some of those issues. Second month, I just don't think we're ready to move forward. Third month, fourth month, fifth month. And finally I just said, is it we're not ready? Or is it that you're not ready? These are questions and situations that have to be named. Sometimes a shepherd, they may actually be ready, but someone they deeply care about is not ready. And they're concerned about a person or a couple of people, and they're saying, we're not ready. It's not we, it's we are not ready. Okay? This is a real challenge for a shepherd to say, sometimes we don't sacrifice the entire group for the needs of 2 or 3 people. These are tough decisions. They should be discerned with prayer, and you should give adequate amount of time to come to that conclusion. But if you're not careful, a shepherd will hold the group hostage. They will. And they're doing it out of concern for people, but it's not the only people we should be concerned about. These are tough decisions, right? Okay. The teacher is didaskalos, and the teacher is the one who explains and trains. And I would put under here, you would put topic and task under here. So, for example, some teachers are really good at explaining complex ideas, and they love getting up front and talking about the Bible and doing theology and all this kind of thing, right? Some teachers are really good at training other people to accomplish certain tasks. In other words, they're not into ideas, they're not into information, they're not into wooing and wowing you with what I know about the Bible. They're actually really good at taking a project and helping the project actually land and operationalize on the ground, and helping people work through the step-by-step process of implementing the idea. Okay? Now, let me pause here and say, are there any questions or reflections or anything like that before we move on?
Will somebody on the group potentially have both operations? You have sometimes you have people that are gifted in multiple areas, not just one.
Yes, that's a good question. He was asking, on a team, is there sometimes people on the team who have more than one gifting on the team instead of just one gifting? Okay. We discussed this in our book, but let's say you have an evangelist. We think you have all 5 capacities within you. Okay. This is why we say this. Okay. Ephesians 4 says that we're supposed to equip one another for works of ministry, right? If you didn't have the capacity to function as a shepherd within you, no amount of training or equipping would help you. You would be hopeless. Okay? The fact that it tells us to equip one another implies that you actually have the capacity to do the thing I would equip you to do. If I'm a shepherd, what would I equip you to do? I would equip you to shepherd. So if we're supposed to equip each other, it implies you have the capacity to do it. So what we say is we have all 5 within us. So let's say you have an evangelist, a teacher. Their secondary is teacher. Their third is prophet. Their fourth is apostle. And their 5th is shepherd. Okay? This would be a strength for that person. In other words, this person will be really good at creating some curriculum to train other people how to do evangelism. Okay? This particular task, this would be a strength, and then, let me just go ahead and write that there. This would be a bit of a struggle for an evangelist to function prophetically. In other words, maybe I shouldn't talk to this person about Jesus until I hear the Lord tell me to do it. Maybe I don't need to spam everyone about the gospel. Maybe I should sit back and say, Lord, who do you want me to talk to? And maybe I should only talk to them. That's an area of equipping for this evangelist. Okay? So that would be a struggle. This would be a stretch. And, this is ligament language. This is body language, right? This is the metaphor Paul's using in Ephesians 4, the body and ligaments and joint together. And okay, this would be a real stretch for them, this idea of creating systems and starting something from the ground up and creating the organizational architecture for it. That would be a challenge for this person. And then you have an all-out strain, which means I bring people into the community, but I don't walk with them after I've brung them in. I just drop them off like they're luggage, you know. So on a team, this is all theoretical right here, right? On a team, you would only need 3 people on a team to have a primary and secondary represented on the team. So if you had an evangelist, a teacher, and a prophet, if the evangelist's secondary gifting was shepherd, the teacher's secondary gifting was apostle, and the prophet's secondary gifting was evangelism, you've got all 5 of these giftings. You have a strength, but you may struggle at certain things on your plant. But guess what? You ever done any working out, exercising? How do your muscles grow? Stretching and struggling. That's called working out. That's called growth and maturity. So just 3 people, you're setting pretty well if you got some kind of diversity of primary and secondary on your team. It's a really good question.
All right, if they go too far into it, if you don't want to respond, that's understandable. But do you think that maybe your secondary, I guess, sort of gifting could be situational in the sense of, like, I would relate to a prophet. I'm a husband and an apostle, and we do ministry together. And I really test pretty evenly with evangelism and the teacher, but I feel like the teacher thing is situational.
Yes.
For church planning. Does that make sense?
Yes. I would say that the thing that leads us to functioning in these things are either relationships we're in, okay, which means if you're on my team, if this guy has if this guy has a teammate who's a prophet, he's going to be constantly rubbing up against and receiving and having access to prophetic sensibilities on the team. Which means they're going to start thinking prophetically because I have access to the way you think. I'm going to start processing challenges we face. Over time, I'll start to absorb that into me. That's a form of equipping. Okay? Yeah, so I am I hitting what you're talking about there?
Sort of. I guess I was saying in the sense that if we started a church and we didn't have on our leadership a teacher at that point.
Yes.
And I feel like the Lord sort of gave me the grace there.
Yes.
That makes sense, I guess, too.
Yes. Built into this is a spirituality of weakness, right? If I'm strong in one area, that means I have at least 4 weaknesses. So from the get-go, I should be open to receiving an outside source of help. If this is me and I find myself having to do shepherding, all of a sudden you're in a really big place of weakness. Now you can cover that up and try to front and try to act out like you really know what you're doing. Or you can take on that posture of humility and weakness and say, Lord, I need a lot of grace from you right now to actually do this because I'm stinking it up. Right? This is what he means by, to each one of us grace has been given according to the measure of Christ's gift. Okay? I don't have much grace naturally in this area, which means I need to open myself up and say, can you give me the grace to press through this? Because it's really not what I'd like to be doing right now. Right? When you go through that season, this is called growth and maturity. Any other thoughts before we keep going?
One of the things I struggle with is so say I'm leading a team where we're not using this language yet.
Yes.
How do we organically create a conversation to be able to identify where we are, where our teammates are? Maybe that's where you're going.
Yeah.
But I struggle to find particularly an organic way to do that.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about understanding Ephesians 4, if you start at verse 7, which we didn't do, if you start at verse 7, he says, to each one of us, right? These are in your team, whether you recognize them or not. Okay? Now, granted, sometimes we can create a monoculture where you tend to attract a lot of people with the same gifting, and then you create this really unhealthy culture. Okay? But these things are in the group if you're willing to name them. And the reason why you want to name them is now I can categorize and legitimize the things that are functioning in the group. Okay? This sort of brings us to this next principle of finding a balance between unity and diversity. Okay? So, if you have this is a matrix, this is high and high, low and low on here. If you have an overemphasis on unity, in other words, everybody needs to be doing the same things here. Okay? This often happens with a very charismatic leader. Their own gifting, their own spirituality becomes the point of reference within the community for what spirituality is. Okay? And what that does is people who aren't wired like that, people who aren't gifted like that, they feel like they're less spiritual because they don't express their spirituality the way they do. Okay? In the biological world, if you want to apply it in the sociological world, that's called cloning. That's called creating an environment where everyone feels like I've got to be like them. And then the leader thinking, if you're not like me, there must be something wrong with you. This is a very unhealthy environment to be a part of. I've been a part of that. And I'm very ashamed to say I've actually facilitated that. Okay? This is before I was trained in diversity. Before I started to learn how to respect diversity. Instead of me trying to change who you are so you can help me do what I want to do, why don't I just accept you for who you are? And figure out how you can bring value to what's already going on. Why do I feel the need to clone? Because I feel the need to control. Now, if I understand there's a diversity of ministries, then I can temper this unity. If I overemphasize diversity, but we don't have anything to hold us together, which is why Paul does in Ephesians 4:1-6, there's one Lord, there's one faith, there's one baptism, there's one God. What is he doing? He's anchoring the community who's made up of a diversity of ministries. If you don't have that sense of unity among the group, those core convictions, if you awaken this in the group, you'll, instead of having a cloning culture, you'll have a competing culture. Competitive. My ministry is more important than yours. No, my ministry is more important. No, his is more important. No. These are all of equal value. They just play different roles and functions in the group. Now, if you're low on both of these, and this is sort of tongue-in-cheek here, you're just congregating. Low on unity, low on diversity, you're just occupying the same space at the same time, and everybody's going home afterwards. You just have a collection of people. That's called religion. There's all kinds of that going on. There's all kinds of this going on. This doesn't last for long, but this tends to last. But it's at the expense of the people who don't fit. Now, the ideal thing, the sweet spot to be on, is collaborating. Okay? Well, collaborate around what? This is where we start getting into implementing this. The only thing that can hold this kind of diversity together is a common mission. And this is why the pioneering gifts, the apostolic function, comes to the fore, because without mission, it's all up for grabs on what we collaborate on. Mission can give us that focal point to where it's not me for the community, it's not community for me, it's community for them, which creates community. Alan calls this communitas. It's missional community. Now, if you're hanging out here and you've been cloning, I would suggest you pull back for a little bit. Stop putting so much pressure on the community to be like a certain way. And the process I typically tell people to go through is go through a period of awareness, a period of agreement, and then a period of alignment. And what that means is we need to create awareness within the community about a diversity of ministries. We need to get into the text, Ephesians 4. We need to start reading some literature and say, what would it look like for us to start recognizing where these things are already functioning in our community? My guess is you guys already have some of this going on in your community. You're just not naming it that way. You're just not categorizing that way. It's already there. Okay? Then you need to come to an agreement, unity, about this topic. Then you need to go through the hard work of aligning what you're doing with these principles. See, that word equipping means to set a broken bone. That's called alignment. It's bringing things into alignment. Why? Because with a broken bone, you can't walk. If you will bring alignment, now we can function properly. Now we can actually start to move forward. Without alignment, you're going to be limping along. We need equipping, bringing alignment into the picture. Now, I've got a very, what do I got? I got like 10 minutes here. What I want to do is I want to put something on the table, and this is a, yes?
Real quick, those three work in the other quadrants towards collaboration, just in a different order or something?
Oh, yes, I didn't finish what I was saying, did I? I kind of aborted there. Yeah, I would say when you do this, when you pull back and you go through this process, when you awaken diversity, it's going to kick in some fear and maybe even the feeling like we're getting a competitive environment here. Why? Because some people have been delegitimized in the community, and now all of a sudden they have language and they have license to function in their gifting, and it's going to awaken some forces in the community. We're going to feel like, whoa, it seems like they're trying to take over. There's a coup going on in our community, right? All the people who haven't been legitimized are now starting to be up here, and you're going to feel like there's a competitive environment, right? So it's going to feel like this and may even awaken this, which is why you need to have the hard work done here, and then you can start moving in this direction, right? If you do have a competing culture already, you need to go in this direction. You need to pull back, take the foot off the gas pedal, go through some of this, and start to move in this direction. Okay? Which means we need to be certain about what are the core essentials of unity in our community. And these are non-negotiables, i.e. Ephesians 4, 1 through 6, i.e. your vision and your values. Right? This is the nature of community. Every community has vision and values and whatnot. And at some point, traveling with that community, you have to make a decision. Are those vision and values going to be my vision and values? That's the nature of community. If you try to get away from that, you get away from community. That's called a paradox. Two opposing things that originate from the same source. If you try to mess with one, you mess with the other one, and it collapses. That community is paradoxical. So, let me put something out there real quick, and then we're going to do a group exercise, if we have time. So this is a decision-making model that was developed by a guy named Pascal, Richard Pascal, who wrote Surfing the Edge of Chaos. It's actually elaborated in his book, Managing on the Edge, okay, which is a really good text to apply some of this stuff, right? He talks about 4 stages And this is a decision-making model for a group to use to make sure you're leveraging everyone's intelligence in the group. Okay? Fit is where you could just read unity into that. Okay? Fit means when we start this process out, we need to affirm each other and say, we're on the same team, we love each other, these are our core vision and our values, these are the things we unite around. If you don't go through the work of doing that, and you try to go through this process, it will backfire on you. Okay? This is a gateway in this process. If you don't know your vision and your values, and you don't love each other as a team, it gets really messy in these next phases. Okay? So you go through fit, and then the next part of the decision-making process is called split. So let's say you've got a church planter who's getting some momentum going in their church, and then this old and dying congregation near to where they're planting approaches them and says, we want you guys to come and take over our building, and we want you guys to come and be a part of our group. Okay, we've only got 15 people. You guys have 30. Can we work something out here? Okay? This is a very significant decision to make, right? What would happen if we approached that decision and said, let's entertain this decision from an apostolic perspective? Are there anything we need to pay attention to here that this situation may actually compromise or subvert our efforts at being missional in our community? Is there anything we need to pay attention to here? What about sustainability? What about movement? Can our church handle the financial situation with this, where we then go into panic mode to meet the finances of this existing local church, right? What about issues related to power? Will they be okay with us doing mission? Or will they try to put a clamp down when we start bringing people in with short shorts, and then we do a church social and somebody breaks out a six-pack? What's going to happen? This has to do with sustainability. This has to do with mission, right? We need to entertain these things in this particular decision to make. What about prophetic? Is anyone heard anything from God about this? Do we want to do some prayer and fasting about this? Is there anything that will compromise us being incarnational in this community? What about evangelism? Will this hinder or help our evangelism in the community? All of these things. What you're saying is, let's entertain this from the apostolic perspective. If you don't have anything to say from an apostolic perspective on this challenge, don't say anything. You have to put that hat on. When we're done, we'll put the P hat on, then the E hat on. You're populating the canvas with multiple perspectives. What does this do? It makes sure that you're going to make a more informed decision. Okay? The next phase would be contend. So you don't really like, promote or, try to, vie for a particular perspective. You're just populating the canvas. That's all you're doing at this stage. This stage is when you say, now let's all step back into our roles on the team, and let's start saying which one of these options do we need to combine, and how should we move forward? This is when we get the opportunity to grow and mature. Isn't it interesting that Paul says in Ephesians 4, speak the truth in love? Which means I need permission to speak the truth on this team without feeling like there's going to be some kind of repercussion from being on this team. Why? Because there's things we have to entertain to make a good decision here. If I never open myself up to you in your perspective on the team, what does that say about me? What does that say about how I view you? These are very subtle forms of communication. If I do not open up to you, what am I saying about you? That's right. And yet there's this intelligence within the group that I'm not accessing now. Okay? You know what Reg Revin says? He says the complexity of the organization has to be greater than or equal to the complexity in the environment. What does that mean? If you don't have diversity in your organization, the diversity of the environment will eat your lunch. You don't have what it takes in the organization to deal with the complexity of the challenges you're facing. If you as a leader do not open yourself up to the people on your team, you're making yourself vulnerable to the energies and forces in your environment. Does this make sense? This has to do with Thank you. This has to do with adaptability. The community becomes adaptive when you enter diversity into the situation. Okay? At this phase, we have to give each other permission to disagree, to press back, and contend. On V3, in the team with me, Dan, and JR, we contend all the time. Right? We did 2 nights ago, and it was pretty intense. Right? But guess what? Me and Dan are in the same hotel room, and we went and had lunch today, and he totally downloaded some things to me that I've never thought of and have never entertained and integrated into my strategies with church planting. And if I would not have opened myself up to him and mutually submitted to him, I would have never had access to that. He would have felt shut down. See, now I'm more intelligent now. I'll go about my church planting now with a greater level of adaptability and sensitivity to issues related to prophetic issues.
So are you saying the contend is like, we threw all this stuff up on the board, and now as I'm wired and you're wired, we each kind of state the case?
Yes. Yes.
So we allow each other the freedom to state it all the way.
Yes, that's right. It requires listening. Okay? Different people will love different phases of this process. Oh, I love it when we talk about how we love each other and we're such a great team together. And then we start talking about different perspectives. People curl in. You know, later in Ephesians 4, he says, do not lie to one another because we are members of one another. Did you know when you withhold your perspective on the team, you're giving a false impression to the team that you agree with them when you really don't agree with them? That's called lying. Okay? Did you know when you're overly dominant and pushing your perspective on someone where you belittle them, that's not speaking the truth in love, is it? See, each person has something they have to deal with when they start engaging this process. But guess what? That's what matures us. That's how we grow.
Can you explain a little bit of the difference between the two? Because I feel like when the split is about talking about the different perspectives, and then the contend, like what happens what's the difference between those two meetings?
Yeah. This one is we try to remain neutral.
Okay.
So what does it mean to think, well, we probably need to think about this, probably need to think about that, and just going to go down the list. This is where I say, I think these 3 things right here are the most important, and that's how we need to move forward. Okay. And somebody else says, no, I think you're missing something. I think it's actually these 3 things. And this is where we start going back and forth, right? Some people they always ask, well, what happens if you lock horns and you can't move forward? That's when I say, well, maybe you should do a lot of prayer and thought and come back together and go through this process again. That would be the prophet. Maybe we need to listen to God and see what the Lord tells all of us, right? If after a period of time you can't come to a resolution, that's when I say you default to the authority structure within the team. But guess what? If you repeatedly do that, and the principal leader on the team repetitively ignores the people on the team is not stupid. It's grounds for talking about character issues now. See, this process brings a narcissistic person out into the open. it will tease them out into the open. If they over and over again lock horns, won't listen to anybody else's perspective, always got to be their way, over a period of time, this will come out, and this process gives you the space to confront that. Now, ideally, after doing this, you can transcend, and what this means is you end up making a decision that accounts not only for the trees, but the forest, as well as the season you're in. Big picture, small picture, timing. Where are we as a community? Okay? When we've done this in our community, when we were multiplying our first group of 30 people and going into 2 groups of 15, I thought we were just going to go through this thing like in 2 weeks and we'd figure it out and we'd keep moving. We ended up spending 3 months on it before we multiplied. Because we had to decide, are we going to do geographical or are we going to do affinity-based multiplication? I'm telling you, I learned a lot about the people in our group. Their giftings really came to the fore when we started discussing on our leadership team, how do we need to multiply? And I'd love to go into all the ways they came out, but we're running out of time here. So I don't think we have time for a group exercise, but you guys have been really patient to hear me yak for an hour. So appreciate you guys.
Thank you.